he has great ring psychology, and that's what it takes to really get in there and be able to work with anybody, anytime. I mean, he can go in the ring with you and make you look like $1 million, or he can make you look like nothing.
Every legend says it. Stone Cold calls him the absolute greatest. Hogan says he's his hero. Shawn Michaels whispered, "I'm sorry, I love you," before ending his career. The Undertaker puts him alongside the Immortals. John Cena honors the championship record they share. Randy Orton credits him with opening the door. But even the people closest to him couldn't always stand him. The praise is real. The conflicts were just as real. And the path from hatred to respect took decades of bitterness to walk. Triple H called Flair his best friend. He said people warn you never to meet your heroes because they'll disappoint you. But Flair was different. Triple H met his hero, and they became best friends. They built Evolution together. Triple H, Flair, a young Randy Orton, and Batista. They changed the business together. They dominated Raw for years. Triple H inducted Flair into the Hall of Fame. He felt extreme pressure doing it. Flair wasn't just a legend to him. He was family. Then, in 2021, everything fell apart. Flair wanted out of WWE. He asked for his release. WWE granted it. Flair was free. Then came the trademark war. Flair claimed he owned The Man as his personal intellectual property. WWE disagreed. Flair threatened to drag them into court. He made it clear he wasn't backing down. Triple H, his supposed best friend, went silent. 6 months of nothing. Not a word, not a call. Not even when Triple H suffered a near-fatal cardiac event in 2022. The friendship fractured over business, over control, over who owned what. Eventually, they reconciled. But that silence said everything. That's the Flair story in miniature. Praise on camera, chaos behind it, and silence when the personal cost gets too high. And if you want to give this story some hype, tap the hype feature and hype this video up while we get into it. The wrestling world calls Flair the standard, but that standard came with ego, fallouts, and fights that took decades to calm down. Everyone eventually made peace because the business is small and memories are long, but the path to forgiveness was messy. It was bitter. It was public, and it revealed something uncomfortable about what it costs to be close to greatness. So, what does greatness even mean in wrestling? Because fans and wrestlers don't measure it the same way, not even close. Casual observers look at mainstream appeal. They see who crossed over into movies, who sold the most merchandise, who became a household name outside wrestling, who got the talk show appearances and the endorsement deals. That's one version of greatness. Commercial dominance, pop culture footprint, the ability to draw money from people who don't even watch wrestling. That's the Hulk Hogan standard. Global reach. Simplified storytelling for mass appeal. 6-time WWF champion, representing centralized corporate dominance. Mainstream celebrity that transcended the ring. But inside the locker room, the criteria are completely different. Wrestlers judge each other on carrying ability. Can you make a green rookie who's still learning look like a star? Can you call a match on the fly when the planned finish doesn't work? They judge durability. Can you work 300 nights a year without breaking down? Can you take punishment night after night and still show up the next day? They judge crowd psychology. Can you control 20,000 people with a look, a pause, a gesture? Can you make them react exactly when you want them to? They judge work ethic. Do you show up hurt, tired, broken down, and still deliver a performance that matters? By those standards, the industry has picked Flair. Not because he was the most famous, not because he sold the most tickets in one city, but because he could do the job better than anyone else, night after night, opponent after opponent, territory after territory. 16 to 25 world championships across multiple promotions. In-ring narrative structure, carrying capability, match length that could stretch to 60 minutes and keep the crowd invested the entire time. That's the peer consensus. But peer consensus doesn't mean universal love. It doesn't mean everyone liked him. It doesn't mean the journey was smooth. It just means they all eventually admitted he was the best at the parts that mattered to them, even when they hated him for it. Flair's foundation was built in pain. In the winter of 1971, he showed up at Werner Gagne's legendary training camp outside Minneapolis. It was held in a converted barn on the outskirts of the city. The winter cold cut through the walls. No heat, no comfort, just work. The curriculum was brutal by design. Old school conditioning meant to break anyone who wasn't truly committed to the business. Gagne didn't want stars. He didn't want charisma. He wanted survivors. He wanted legitimate athletes who could endure the daily grind without complaint. The camp attracted wrestlers from across the country. Flair trained alongside Greg Gagne, Werner's son, Jim Brunzell, who would later become a tag team star, the Iron Sheik, who would become a world champion, Ken Patera, an Olympic weightlifter turned wrestler, wrestler. These were serious competitors with serious athletic backgrounds. The camp had one singular purpose: weed out the weak, test mental toughness beyond physical limits, push bodies until someone quit or proved they belong. The drills were designed to punish: running in the snow, endless squats, wrestling takedowns until muscles fail. It wasn't about teaching moves. It was about building the foundation to survive 300 nights a year on the road. Flair made it through. He proved he had the endurance needed. He proved he could handle the physical and mental pain. But that was just the beginning. Surviving Gagne's camp didn't make him special. Dozens of others survived too. It just meant he was ready to start learning the actual business. And even then, there were no guarantees of success. In 1975, everything changed. Flair survived a plane crash in North Carolina. It was near fatal. The accident claimed lives. People died. Johnny Valentine, Bob Brugers, David Crockett, and Tim Woods all suffered severe career-altering injuries. Flair fractured his back. The injury was catastrophic. Doctors told him his in-ring career was over. He couldn't wrestle the same way anymore. His original power wrestling style relied on strength and explosiveness. He needed his back for leverage, for lifts, for control. That was gone. His body couldn't support the style that got him this far, so he faced a choice: quit or reinvent. He chose reinvention. He dropped his regional baby fat. He changed his body entirely. He built a new persona from scratch. He borrowed the Nature Boy name from the original pioneer, Buddy Rogers. He took stylistic elements from Buddy Rose and Rip Hawk. He stole the signature corner turnbuckle flip from Ray the Crippler Stevens. This wasn't innovation. This was survival. He turned himself into a bump machine because that's what his broken back could handle. High impact, back first falls became his signature. He learned to absorb punishment in ways that protected his injury but still looked devastating. 60-minute matches became routine because his new style was about endurance, not power. Year-round touring became the expectation because he had to prove the crash didn't end him. He rebuilt himself completely, but that new version needed the spotlight every night. He couldn't just be good. He had to be the center of attention. He had to be the standard. The crash didn't humble him. It made him desperate to prove he was still worth watching. That desperation drove everything that came after. The moment the business officially picked Flair came through Harley Race. Race was the legitimate standard of the 1970s. A touring champion respected across every territory. Tough, credible, and impossible to argue with. When Race wrestled, people believed it. His credentials were unquestionable. So when Race decided to pass the torch, it meant something. It wasn't just storyline. It was validation from the one man whose opinion actually mattered. The transition happened at the inaugural Starrcade in 1983, the first Starrcade, the event that would define the NWA for years. A steel cage match between Race and Flair. The storyline leading in was perfect. Race had placed a $25,000 bounty on Flair's head. He wanted Flair taken out. Bob Orton and Dick Slater answered the call. They attacked Flair in a brutal, staged injury angle designed to write him off television. Flair came back from that attack to face Race in the cage. It was a coronation disguised as a fight. Race put him over clean. Flair won. Then Race did something even more important. He went on camera after the match and called Flair arguably the greatest wrestler to ever step into the squared circle. Flair cried. Actual tears. It wasn't scripted, it was genuine emotion. Later, Flair admitted, without Harley Race, there is no Ric Flair. He understood what that endorsement meant. Race gave him legitimacy he couldn't earn on his own, but it also locked him into a role. He was now the standard everyone else had to chase, and he made sure they knew it. Every night, every promo, every interview. He wasn't just the champion, he was the reminder that no one else measured up. He was the gatekeeper, the measuring stick, the standard they all had to beat. That's not generosity, that's control. And Flair held that control for decades. Ricky Steamboat took that foundation and turned it into legend. Steamboat repeatedly said Flair was the single most significant influence on his entry into the main event scene. Their in-ring chemistry was unlike anything else in the history of the sport. Steamboat trusted Flair completely. He trusted Flair's timing. He trusted Flair's execution. He trusted Flair to protect him while making him look incredible. During their prime in the Carolinas territory, they worked 45 to 60 minutes every single night on the road. That's not a special occasion. That's not a pay-per-view main event. That's the standard schedule, night after night. town after town, carrying the territory on their backs. The matches weren't just good, they were consistently excellent. The physical trust required for that kind of schedule is immense. Steamboat had to believe Flair wouldn't hurt him. Flair had to believe Steamboat could keep up. Their 1989 trilogy became the gold standard for in-ring storytelling. 3 matches that defined what wrestling could be. At Wrestle War 89, Music City Showdown in Nashville, Flair defeated Steamboat to claim his 6th NWA World Heavyweight Championship. He systematically targeted Steamboat's injured knee. Every move built towards the finish. Every spot told a story. He won with a precise inside cradle. It was technical perfection, pure wrestling craft. The 1989 trilogy between Flair and Steamboat stands as perhaps the greatest series of matches in wrestling history. The first match took place at Chi-Town Rumble in Chicago on February 20th. Steamboat defeated Flair to win the NWA World Heavyweight Championship in a match that went over 23 minutes. The crowd was electric. Every near fall felt like it could be the finish. Steamboat's precision met Flair's psychology in perfect harmony. The second match happened at Clash of the Champions 6 in New Orleans on April 2nd. Flair regained the championship in another technical masterpiece that showcased both men at their absolute peak. Then came the rubber match at Wrestle War 89 in Nashville on May 7th. This was the one that cemented both their legacies. 31 minutes of storytelling that built to Flair's victory, using the inside cradle after systematically destroying Steamboat's knee throughout the match. What made these matches special wasn't just the athletic performance, it was the trust. Steamboat had to trust that Flair would protect him during every high-risk sequence. Flair had to trust that Steamboat could keep up with the pace and the psychology for that long without either man breaking character or breaking down physically. The matches were worked at a pace that would exhaust modern wrestlers in 10 minutes, yet Flair and Steamboat maintained it for over 30 minutes each time. Critics and fellow wrestlers still study these matches today as blueprints for how to construct long-form wrestling storytelling. But the trilogy also revealed something about Flair's approach to the business. He needed opponents at Steamboat's level to look as good as he wanted to look. And Steamboat paid the price physically for making Flair look like the greatest champion in the world. But even Steamboat's praise came with a cost. To make Flair look that good, Steamboat had to work that hard. Every single night. No breaks, no shortcuts, no nights off. Steamboat elevated Flair's legacy, but Flair demanded it. That's the pattern. He needed the best opponents to prove he was the best, but he also needed them to publicly agree he was better. The validation had to be complete. As the NWA's traveling champion, Flair's primary job was to elevate young, unpolished babyfaces. That was the role. Go into a territory, work with a local star, make them look good, make yourself look better, move on to the next town. He executed that role with remarkable efficiency. When Jim Crockett Promotions acquired smaller regional territories, Flair adopted several rising talents. Sting and Rick Steiner were the most notable. Flair immediately recognized dollar signs in Sting. He saw the potential, the look, the athleticism, the charisma, so he worked a series of grueling matches designed to build Sting's physical credibility and prepare him for the main event spotlight. He carried Sting through the learning process. He taught him how to work long matches, how to pace a crowd, how to make every moment count. That sounds like mentorship, it sounds like generosity, but it also kept Flair in control. He decided who was ready. He decided who got the spotlight. He decided when the torch would pass. Flair was the gatekeeper and everyone knew it. When WCW collapsed in 2001, Sting and Flair wrestled each other in the final match of WCW Monday Nitro on March 26th. It was supposed to be a nostalgic farewell, a tribute to everything they built together, but Flair was physically out of shape. The years had caught up with him. Backstage, he argued intensely with Shane McMahon. Flair insisted that he and Sting weren't ready to perform. He didn't think they could deliver. Shane disagreed. The match happened anyway. Despite Flair's reservations, the two delivered a fitting, nostalgic finale to the promotion that had defined their careers. But even on the last night of WCW, Flair needed to be the center of the story. It couldn't just be Sting's moment. It couldn't just be a celebration of WCW. It had to be their moment. Flair and Sting together. Flair made sure of it. To some, that's generosity, sharing the spotlight on the final night. To others, that's control, making sure he stays relevant even when the company dies. He always had to be involved. The Hogan debate defined an entire era of wrestling discourse. Who was greater? Hogan represented sports entertainment spectacle, bright colors. Simple stories, huge personalities. Flair represented territorial work rate, technical wrestling, long matches, intricate psychology. Hogan had the global pop culture footprint, six-time WWF champion, mainstream celebrity who appeared in movies, cartoons, and commercials. He transcended wrestling. People who never watched wrestling knew who Hulk Hogan was. That's commercial dominance on a scale Flair never achieved. Flair had 16 to 25 world championships across NWA, WCW, and WWF. Longer matches, more technical storytelling, the respect of the locker room, but not the mainstream recognition. They represented two completely different philosophies about what wrestling should be. But even Hogan, the ultimate mainstream star, conceded the in-ring debate. He repeatedly called Flair his hero. He said Flair is the greatest professional wrestler of all time based on pure in-ring performance. From their verbal sparring in the 1980s to their 2010 partnership in TNA's Immortal faction, Hogan consistently praised Flair's work ethic. In a December 2020 interview with India Today and during the famous 2002 off-the-record debate, Hogan acknowledged that Flair raised the bar that no one has really been able to follow as far as work ethic. That's a huge admission from someone who dominated the industry commercially. Hogan's admission that Flair is the greatest based on pure in-ring work carries enormous historical weight. Consider the context. Hogan was the face that drew millions to WWF in the 1980s. He main evented the first 9 WrestleManias. He appeared in Hollywood films. He had his own cartoon series. He was on magazine covers and talk shows. He transcended professional wrestling in ways Flair never did and never could. Hogan didn't need to concede anything to Flair. Commercially, Hogan won the war decisively. He made more money. He achieved greater fame. He became a bigger cultural icon. So when Hogan says Flair is his hero and the greatest wrestler of all time, he's admitting something profound. He's admitting that commercial success and cultural impact don't automatically translate to in-ring greatness. He's acknowledging there's a difference between being the biggest star and being the best worker. That distinction matters inside the wrestling business. It's the difference between drawing casual fans who watch occasionally and earning the respect of people who understand what actually happens inside the ring. Hogan gave Flair that acknowledgement publicly and repeatedly. But even that wasn't enough for Flair. In interviews over the years, Flair has brought up Hogan's comments over and over again. He references them constantly. He makes sure new audiences know that Hogan called him the greatest. It's not enough that Hogan said it. Flair needs everyone to remember that Hogan said it. The validation is never complete. The recognition is never sufficient. There's always another audience that needs to hear it. Always another generation that needs to be told. That hunger for acknowledgement never fades, never diminishes, never reaches satisfaction. Hogan didn't need to say it. He was bigger than Flair in every measurable way. Box office, merchandise, cultural impact. But he said it anyway. He acknowledged Flair's in-ring superiority. But even when Flair won that debate on skill, the fight for credit never stopped. Flair needed Hogan to say it publicly. He needed the validation from the one man who could match his legacy. And even after getting it, he kept bringing it up. In interviews, in podcasts, in promos. He couldn't just let the win stand. He had to make sure everyone remembered who admitted what. That need for constant acknowledgement defined his entire career. WrestleMania 24 gave Flair the perfect ending. Shawn Michaels retired him in what many consider a masterpiece of emotional bell-to-bell storytelling. The match built slowly. Every move mattered. Every near fall carried weight. The crowd knew this was the end. Michaels and Flair both understood the stakes. They weren't just working a match. They were closing a chapter of wrestling history. The match climax came when Michaels set up for sweet chin music. Flair was down, barely able to stand. Michaels looked at him. There was a pause, a moment of hesitation. Then Michaels whispered, "I'm sorry, I love you." He delivered sweet chin music. Flair's career ended. That whispered line became one of the most iconic moments in wrestling history. It was framed as honor, a passing of the torch with respect and dignity. Michaels later explained how deeply he respected Flair as the absolute greatest of his era. Flair returned the compliment, consistently identifying Michaels as the greatest overall in-ring performer in the history of the business. It was mutual respect at the highest level. Perfect symmetry, perfect closure. But it also looked like something else. It looked like the business finally closing the book on a man who would never stop on his own. Flair didn't retire because he wanted to. He retired because WWE scripted it. The story demanded it. Career versus streak. Flair had to lose. And even that perfect, emotional, universally praised ending wasn't enough. Flair came back for more matches later, independent shows, international tours, even another last match in 2022. The perfect ending at WrestleMania. 24 couldn't keep him away. He needed more. The spotlight was too addictive. The validation was too necessary. He couldn't let go. Stone Cold Steve Austin became one of Flair's loudest, most consistent supporters in the modern era. In July 2019, hours before WWE's Raw reunion event in Tampa, Austin ran into Flair by chance. The interaction was caught on camera. Austin looked directly at Flair and said, "He's the absolute greatest of all time to ever lace up a pair of boots and the greatest world champ of all time." Flair was visibly moved. You could see the emotion on his face. The two had history going back to their shared tenure in WCW. They worked together, they traveled together, they understood each other's careers. But there's important context here. Just weeks before this encounter, in June 2019, Flair had survived a critical health crisis. He nearly died. Flair publicly credited Austin's supportive text messages with helping him get through that terrifying period. Austin checked in. He sent encouragement. He reminded Flair that people cared. So when Austin praised him publicly, weeks later at Raw reunion, it felt deeply personal. This wasn't just a wrestling legend praising another legend. This was a friend showing up when it mattered. They later did an emotional, extended sit-down on Austin's Broken Skull Sessions podcast. The conversation went deep. They talked about WCW. They talked about the business. They talked about survival. The praise was genuine and heartfelt. But it was also tied to a moment when Flair desperately needed support. Austin gave it freely, and Flair made sure everyone knew. In subsequent interviews, Flair repeatedly referenced Austin's texts, Austin's support, Austin's validation. Even genuine friendship became part of the narrative Flair controlled. The Undertaker placed Flair in his personal pantheon of wrestling immortals. On the debut episode of Austin's Broken Skull Sessions, Undertaker was asked about the greatest wrestlers of all time. He named Flair alongside Dusty Rhodes, Harley Race, and Ricky Steamboat. He said, "I still to this day, the Flairs and the Rhodes and the Races and Steamboats, they're up there. I don't care what people say about me or anything. Those are the guys." That's elite company, the absolute top tier of wrestling history. But notice the framing. Undertaker had to clarify that he didn't care what people said about him. He had to defend his own legacy before praising Flair. Even complimenting Flair required defensive positioning, because praising Flair means implicitly admitting someone else might be better than you. It means acknowledging a standard you might not reach. Undertaker also honored Flair at ringside after what was billed as Flair's final match in 2022. He stood with other legends, paying tribute. The respect is undeniable. The reverence is real. But even that respect came with the weight of history. You can't just casually compliment Flair. You can't just say he's good and move on. You have to place him in context. You have to explain why he matters. You have to justify the praise, because Flair's legacy is so intertwined with wrestling's identity that praising him feels like making a statement about the entire industry. Then there's the Triple H situation, which we started with. Triple H's entire career trajectory was shaped by his relationship with Flair. Evolution was the cornerstone, the faction that defined a generation of Raw programming. Triple H, Flair, Randy Orton, and Batista. 4 horsemen for a new era. They dominated the show for years. Main events, championships, storylines that mattered. Triple H repeatedly called Flair his personal hero and best friend. In a behind-the-scenes clip from WWE 24, Triple H talked about the extreme pressure he felt when asked to induct Flair into the Hall of Fame. This wasn't just inducting a colleague. This was inducting his childhood idol, the man who inspired his entire career. Triple H referenced the old warning about never meeting your heroes. People say it'll disappoint you. The reality can never match the fantasy. But Triple H said, people will say, well, if you get the opportunity in life to meet your hero, don't meet him. I met mine, became best friends with him. That's a powerful statement. It suggests Flair not only lived up to the legend, but exceeded it. The friendship was real. The bond was genuine. But in 2021, cracks appeared. Flair requested and received his release from his WWE contract. WWE granted it. Flair was free to work elsewhere. Then the trademark dispute erupted. Flair claimed he owned the man as his personal intellectual property. He said it was his phrase, his identity, his brand. WWE disagreed. They'd used it extensively for Becky Lynch. Flair didn't care. During a tense phone call with WWE brass, Flair threatened to drag them into court. He made it clear he wasn't backing down. He was willing to sue. Triple H, now a WWE executive and Flair's supposed best friend, went silent. For 6 months, the two didn't communicate. Not a word, not a call, not a text. released. This silence persisted even after Triple H suffered a near-fatal cardiac event in September 2022. His heart was failing. He nearly died. And still, the silence held. Eventually, they reconciled. The details of how remain private. The artistic legacy of Evolution remains undisputed. Randy Orton's career. Batista's rise. The faction's impact on WWE. None of that is diminished. Evolution's impact on WWE programming between 2003 and 2005 cannot be overstated. The faction controlled Raw completely. Triple H held the World Heavyweight Championship for most of that period. Randy Orton won the Intercontinental Championship and then became the youngest World Heavyweight Champion in history at SummerSlam 2004. Batista developed into a main event powerhouse who would eventually headline WrestleMania 21. And Flair, despite being in his 50s, was positioned as the wise veteran who provided legitimacy and guidance. But Evolution wasn't just about putting young stars over. It was about positioning Flair as the kingmaker. He decided when Orton was ready for the World Championship push. He decided when Batista should turn face and challenge Triple H. He was portrayed as the architect behind everything. That positioning reinforced Flair's narrative that he was the standard, the measuring stick, the ultimate authority on who belonged in the main event and who didn't. The younger members of Evolution got opportunities they might not have received otherwise, but they also had to constantly acknowledge Flair's role in creating those opportunities. That dynamic repeated throughout Flair's entire career. Flair gives people opportunities, but the cost is eternal gratitude and public recognition of his role in their success. But the personal cost was real and lasting. Flair's need for control, for ownership, for credit, damaged the closest friendship he had in the modern business. That's the pattern repeating. They praise him publicly, but notice how often the story includes pressure, sacrifice, or personal drama. It's never just simple admiration. It's never just, he's great and we're friends. There's always a cost, always a condition, always a fracture point where the ego overwhelms the relationship. Randy Orton's entire career path owes a direct debt to Flair's mentorship in Evolution. Orton has said it repeatedly and publicly. Randy wouldn't be here without Evolution. That's not exaggeration. That's acknowledgement of reality. Orton was young, raw, and third generation. His grandfather and father were both wrestlers. He had the bloodline, but bloodline doesn't guarantee success. Flair saw something in Orton. He saw himself, the arrogance, the natural charisma, the ability to make people hate you while respecting your skill. Flair noted that Orton strongly reminded him of his younger self. So Flair made a promise. He would personally pave the way to superstardom for the third generation performer, and he did exactly that. Evolution put Orton in high-profile positions, main event angles, championship opportunities, matches against legends. Their partnership bore immediate fruit in moments like the Evolution versus Rock and Sock Connection match at WrestleMania 20. Orton's gratitude is genuine and lasting. He's never wavered from crediting Flair. But again, Flair positioned himself as the gatekeeper. He decided Orton was ready. He decided to help. He decided when to push and when to hold back. That's not just mentorship. That's control. Flair made sure Orton knew exactly who opened the door, and Orton has spent his entire career acknowledging it. John Cena's relationship with Flair is forever built around the 16-time World Championship record. They're tied. Flair held the record alone for decades. Then, Cena matched it. The symmetry is perfect. Two different eras, two different styles, same historical achievement. Cena has repeatedly praised Flair as generous, honorable, and inspirational. When Cena tied the record at the 2017 Royal Rumble, Flair was there, ringside, watching, acknowledging. Cena spoke about it later, saying, "He was nothing but encouraging, so honorable, and so inspirational. He's a wonderful guy, and I'm really happy that he was there." That presence mattered. Flair could have been bitter. He could have resented someone matching his record. Instead, he showed up and supported it. On the Club Shay Shay podcast, Cena went deeper. He identified Flair's relentless historical travel schedule as one of the defining marks of greatness. 300 days a year. Different cities, different opponents, different crowds, all requiring the same level of performance. Cena highlighted Flair's physical sacrifices, the toll it took on his body, the marriages it cost him, the personal relationships that suffered, and he highlighted Flair's unmatched passion, the love for the business that kept him going even when his body was breaking down. When discussing his upcoming 2025 retirement tour, Cena addressed the long-standing fan speculation about a potential 17th World Championship. Would he break the tie? Would he surpass Flair? Cena playfully dismissed it. He joked that if they faced off today, Flair might win. Then he got serious. He emphasized that he has no desire to be handed a record-breaking title shot just for the sake of it. Ric Flair is the definitive peer consensus greatest of all time. But here's what that consensus cost. The standard came with ego. It came with fallouts. It came with fights that took literal decades to calm down. Flair didn't just earn respect through greatness. He demanded it. He controlled it. He made sure no one ever forgot. Even his closest friendships came with pressure. Triple H felt extreme pressure inducting him into the Hall of Fame. Even his mentorships came with conditions. Randy Orton had to publicly acknowledge the debt. Even his praise required acknowledgement in return. John Cena can't just break the record without explaining why Flair matters. Even when people tried to move past him, he pulled them back in. The spotlight was too necessary. The validation was too addictive. That's why he's remembered. Not just for the greatness, which was undeniable. Not just for the championships, which were historic. Not just for the matches, which set the standard, but for the storm that followed it all. The chaos, the conflict, the need for eternal recognition. The business picked him as the standard, but the business also had to survive him. And everyone who got close enough to matter eventually had to make peace with the chaos he created. That's the real Ric Flair legacy. The greatest wrestler of all time, according to everyone who was actually there. And the man who made absolutely certain they never stopped saying it.